Silence swallowed the marble foyer like a tomb closing. Matteo Romano knelt on the black and white checkered floor, his Italian silk suit, the one that cost more than Valentina Reynolds earned in 6 months, soaked with his own sweat, his daughter's body cradled against his chest. Lily. 6 years old. Her lips were the color of bruises. Her small chest was not rising. Thunder rolled across the Boston skyline outside the mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows, and the crystal chandelier trembled above them like a thing alive and afraid. Matteo Romano controlled every street in this city. His word ended conversations. His silence ended lives. But his hands, the hands that had signed 200 death warrants without trembling, shook like those of a man drowning in air. "Call Russo." "Call everyone," he said, but his voice was not thunder anymore. It was a whisper. It was a prayer from a man who had stopped praying decades ago. Tony and Nino stood frozen against the marble walls, their tailored suits and gold watches and Italian leather shoes all completely useless. The security cameras mounted in the corners recorded everything. Armed guards in black stood motionless, paralyzed by the sight of their boss, the untouchable, the unstoppable, reduced to a desperate father holding a child who was not breathing. The family doctor stammered something about calling an ambulance, but his hands would not move. He stood there like a statue. Like a man who had just watched God drop dead. Matteo's fingers found Lily's neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing. Nothing. The August heat pressed down through the windows, thick enough to choke on, and in that suffocating silence, Matteo Romano learned what helplessness felt like. Then the kitchen door burst open. Valentina Reynolds, still wearing her grease-stained diner uniform and the orthopedic shoes worn through at both heels, shoved past 3 bodyguards without hesitation. She moved like a blade, like something sharp and necessary, and she dropped to her knees beside Matteo and his dying daughter. "Move," she said. Not a question. Not a request. Matteo lifted Lily's body away from his chest, and Valentina positioned the child on the cold marble. She tilted the small head back, checked the airway, breathed into the mouth of a 6-year-old girl she had been volunteering with at the shelter for only 3 weeks. 1 compression. 2. 3. Her hands, calloused from 8 years of double shifts and dishes and floors scrubbed until her knuckles bled, pressed down on that tiny chest with a precision that came from somewhere deeper than knowledge. It came from survival. From a woman who had learned that sometimes you have to save yourself because no one else will. Breathe. Compress. Breathe. Compress. "Come on, baby. Come on," she whispered, and her voice was shattered glass, was a candle in the wind, was everything breaking and everything holding together at the same time. 30 compressions. Another breath. The small body shuddered. Then Lily gasped. Her chest heaved upward, and her eyes flew open, and she coughed, and she breathed, and she was alive. She was alive. The child gasped again, her small hands reaching, her lips returning to pink, and she was alive. Matteo Romano stared at this woman, this nobody in a diner uniform, with grease under her fingernails and exhaustion mapped across her face like a geography of endless shifts, and something broke open inside him that no amount of power had ever touched. She had acted. While his empire froze. While his guards stood useless. While his doctors stammered and his lieutenants held their breath. While he, Matteo Romano, the man who controlled every street and every life in this city, knelt there helpless and broken, this woman had acted. Tony's eyes met Nino's across the marble foyer, and neither of them had ever seen their boss look at anyone the way he looked at Valentina Reynolds in that moment. Like she was the only real thing in a room full of ghosts. Like she had just pulled him back from the edge of an abyss. Lily coughed again, her small body shaking, her eyes searching for the face that had saved her. Valentina brushed the wet hair from the child's forehead, her hand gentle, her voice steady now. "You are okay. You are okay. Breathe for me. That is it. Breathe." The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, sirens wailing through the humid August night, their footsteps echoing through the mansion like a drumbeat counting down the seconds of a life just returned from the edge. But what Valentina Reynolds did not know was that 3 days earlier, Lily had placed a small folded note in the front pocket of her backpack. The note was still there. Crumpled. Tucked away. Waiting to be found. And that note contained a secret that would shatter everything. 3 weeks earlier, at 3:22 in the morning, Valentina Reynolds counted $17 in greasy bills on the corner of a metal desk in the back room of Danny's Diner on the edge of Boston. The money lay in front of her in careful piles. 4 ones. 3 fives. 2 fives stacked together. 1 5. She had to count them twice because $17 seemed impossible. How was that possible? She had worked a double shift. 14 hours. Her feet had swollen inside the orthopedic shoes, the ones with the reinforced arch and the medical-grade insole that still felt like walking on broken glass. The diner had been packed with a night crowd. Construction workers. Insomniacs. Truck drivers whose eyes were too tired to focus. And tips. Tips that amounted to $17. Outside, the August heat pressed against the diner windows like something suffocating. Inside, the air conditioning unit wheezed and groaned, producing a sound like a dying animal, and the fluorescent lights hummed their endless, maddening song. Valentina was 28 years old, but the mirror behind the register showed someone older. Someone whose eyes had seen too much. Her dark hair, once thick and rich, hung limp and tangled. Her skin showed the map of sleeplessness. And her hands told the story most clearly. Calloused. Cracked. Stained with burn marks from coffee pots and grease that no amount of washing would remove. She placed the $17 inside an envelope marked rent and slid it into the small wooden box underneath her bed at the shelter where she volunteered and, technically, lived. The envelope beneath it, stamped in red letters that screamed across the white paper, read, "Final Notice. Debt collector. $85,000 due in 7 days or legal action will be pursued." Valentina did not open it. She already knew what was inside. She had been receiving versions of that letter for 2 years. Her mother's medical bills. Surgeries that insurance refused to cover. Treatments that cost more than a human being could earn in a lifetime of shifts like tonight. The letters kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last, each one dated, each one a countdown to a day when someone with authority and cruelty would arrive to take the last thing she owned. She had until Tuesday. That was the date on the latest letter. Tuesday. Which meant she had 5 days to find $85,000, which was impossible, which was a joke, which was the kind of thing that made a person understand that the world was built to break you and then charge you for the broken pieces. Valentina sat on the edge of the cot in her small room at the shelter, and she did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus years ago. Instead, she did what she always did when the numbers would not add up. She opened her laptop, which was 6 years old and held together with tape and willpower, and she looked for work. There was a posting, companion needed for affluent family. Flexible hours. Excellent pay. Discretion required. The photograph showed a 6-year-old girl with dark curling hair and eyes that held a sadness too large for a body so small. Valentina clicked the link. The ad was vague, but the pay listed was specific, $500 per week, to start. $500. That was more than she made in tips for 2 weeks. She had no references except the shelter director, no experience except raising herself and caring for children who had nothing. But there was something in that sad girl's eyes that spoke to something in Valentina's own heart. She applied before she could think too much about what applying meant. The email response arrived at 4 in the morning. "Can you start tomorrow at the shelter where you volunteer? We have been watching the work you do there. We are very interested." No signature. No name. Just those words. Valentina stared at the screen, and a small voice inside her, the voice that had kept her alive through abuse and abandonment and the kind of poverty that teaches you your life has no value, whispered a warning. But the voice was quiet. And the number on that envelope was loud. She replied, "Yes. Tomorrow. Outside, A car door slammed. Footsteps approached along the street, measured, unhurried, the kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who had never in their life felt the need to rush. Valentina closed her laptop and lay back on the cot, and she did not know that her life was about to change in ways she could not imagine. She did not know that the sad girl in the photograph was named Lily, and that Lily was the daughter of the most dangerous man in Boston, and that a boy named Preston Mercer, spoiled, vicious, entitled, had already noticed her, had already decided she could be useful, had already begun planning the extortion that would set everything in motion. She knew only this: she had $17, 5 days, and a stranger who wanted to meet her tomorrow. Sometimes that was enough to keep living. Sometimes that was everything. The red envelope sat in the darkness beneath her bed, and the countdown continued, silent and relentless as a heartbeat. The clock on the diner wall read 3:22 in the morning. Valentina Reynolds stood behind the counter at McGinty's, her orthopedic shoes worn through at the heels, the soles thin enough that she could feel every imperfection in the linoleum floor. Her apron was stained with grease that no amount of washing would remove. 8 shifts a week had taught her this, had taught her that some stains were permanent, like scars, like shame, like the marks on her back that no one would ever see. She counted the bills in her palm. 1, 5, 10, $17. $17 in tips across a double shift that had lasted 16 hours. She had served 43 customers. Only 4 had left her anything at all. The register drawer slammed shut with a sound like a door closing on another chance. $385 a month for rent. $212 for groceries if she bought only rice and beans and the chicken legs no one else wanted. $98 for the subway pass she needed to get here and to Sacred Heart Shelter 4 nights a week. Her phone bill. Her shoes because her feet were destroyed and without shoes she could not work. The math never balanced. It had never balanced. It would never balance. She had learned long ago to stop trying to make it balance and instead to simply survive one day, then the next, then the one after that. Valentina changed out of her uniform in the employee bathroom, pulling on the thin cotton dress she wore to volunteer work. The fluorescent light hummed above the sink. She caught her reflection, dark hair pulled back so tight it pulled at her temples, brown eyes that looked older than 27, a face that seemed to belong to someone who had been through something, though she would never say what. The dress had a small tear near the hem. She did not have money for another one. She rolled up her sleeves to wash her arms, and there it was in the mirror's reflection, the geography of her survival. A thin white scar running from her right shoulder blade down toward her ribs. Another, shorter one across her left shoulder. More beneath, hidden by her clothes, a map drawn in violence 8 years ago by someone who had promised to love her, who had called her names while he hurt her, who had finally left her when he decided she was not worth the effort anymore. She had never shown anyone these marks. The shame of them burned hotter than the abuse ever had. She pulled her sleeves down and did not look at the mirror again. The walk to Sacred Heart Shelter took 23 minutes. Boston streets at 3:45 in the morning were nearly empty, a few late-night delivery trucks, the occasional taxi, the kind of silence that only existed in the deepest part of the night when normal people were sleeping in their beds. The humid August air sat heavy enough to taste, like sweat and asphalt and something rotten beneath the city streets. Her feet ached with every step. The shelter occupied a converted brownstone in a neighborhood that the city had forgotten about 30 years ago. The brick was the color of old blood. The windows were protected by bars that had been painted over so many times the paint was cracking and peeling like dying skin. Inside, the air smelled like industrial cleaning fluid and the particular sadness of a place where people who had nowhere else to go slept on cots in a room designed for half the number of people it held. Sister Margaret was at the front desk, her gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her pale face. She looked up when Valentina came through the door. "You're late," Sister Margaret said. "Double shift ran over," Valentina said. "Is she asleep?" "She's been asleep for an hour." Room 3. "She had a nightmare around midnight. I couldn't get her to stop crying until I told her you would be here in the morning." Sister Margaret removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. That child is too attached to you, Valentina. It's not healthy. When she moves to permanent placement, she will have to learn to let go. Valentina did not respond. She had heard this before. Sister Margaret meant well. Sister Margaret did not understand that for a child like Lily, attachment was survival. Attachment was the difference between breathing and drowning. Attachment was the only reason to wake up. Room 3 was a small space with 3 cots and a single high window that faced the brick wall of the building next door. Lily slept on the first cot, her 6-year-old body curled into a ball, her dark hair tangled across the pillow. She was still wearing the same clothes from that morning, pale pink overalls with a small stain on the left knee where she had fallen while playing in the shelter's cramped backyard. Valentina sat on the edge of the cot. She did not touch the child, not yet. Lily had been abandoned at the shelter 2 months ago, left in a car seat at the front door at 2 in the morning with a note that said only, "Please take care of her." The police had searched for her family. No one had come looking. The system was slow. The paperwork was slow. Everything was slow except poverty, which moved at the speed of light. Lily's eyes opened. She did not cry out. She simply reached out and took Valentina's hand, her small fingers gripping like she was afraid Valentina might disappear if she let go. "I had a bad dream," Lily whispered. "I know, sweetheart. I know. I'm here now." Valentina lay down on the cot beside the child, careful not to take up too much space, and Lily pressed herself against her side. Within minutes, the girl's breathing had slowed and deepened. Valentina lay there in the darkness, one arm around the child, and tried to think of what came next. Not tomorrow. She could not think about tomorrow. Just the next hour. Could she survive the next hour? Yes. The next hour after that? Yes. She had learned to break her life into pieces so small they were almost invisible. At 6 in the morning, Valentina woke Lily and helped her get dressed. She braided the girl's hair 3 sections over and under, the way Lily loved it, the way it made her small face look less afraid. While she braided, Lily talked about nothing important, the color of a bird she had seen in the yard, a dream about candy, a question about whether clouds were made of water or ice. "Both," Valentina said. "They're made of both." "That's nice," Lily said. "I like things that are both." Valentina's phone buzzed with a text from McGinty's. Could she pick up the breakfast shift? Someone had called in sick. She would make another $30, maybe, if she was lucky with the tips. She texted back, yes. The day fractured into pieces. The breakfast shift at the diner. A lunch shift at another restaurant across town where she worked 3 days a week, a place called the Rosewood where she served food to people who did not look at her face. A 4-hour break where she sat in a public library with her laptop and the shelter's public Wi-Fi password, scrolling through job listings that all required experience she did not have or degrees she could not afford. Then back to the diner for the dinner shift. Then the walk to the shelter at midnight, her feet swollen inside her shoes, her back aching from standing, her hands raw from hot water. At 1 in the morning, she changed clothes in the shelter bathroom and looked at her reflection again. The marks on her back seemed darker tonight, or maybe she was just too tired to pretend they were not there. She rolled down her sleeves. 3 nights a week, she slept at the shelter in a small room next to the office. 2 nights a week, she slept at her studio apartment, a single room on the 4th floor of a building where the heat did not work in winter and the roof leaked every time it rained. 1 night a week, she did not sleep. She worked. The math of survival required all 7 days. On Friday night, she brought Lily home to the apartment. The girl had never been there when it was light outside, so Valentina showed her the space like it was something worth seeing, the narrow bed that took up half the room, the small desk with her laptop, the shelf with 7 books she had collected over years. "This is where I live," she said, and meant, "This is what I have. This is everything." They made pasta from a jar of sauce. They sat on the floor because there was no table. Lily fell asleep on the bed at 8 o'clock, and Valentina lay on the floor beside her, one arm reaching up to touch the girl's hand while she slept. In the morning, they walked to a park where the grass was still green and the trees did not know they were in a city that had forgotten them. Lily ran in circles. She climbed on the playground equipment. She laughed, a sound like a bell, like something precious and almost entirely broken by life but not quite. On the walk back to the shelter, they passed a mailbox on the corner of Valentina Street. She checked it out of habit, though nothing good ever came in the mail. Bills came in the mail. Notices came in the mail. Threats came in the mail. There was something red inside. An envelope, thick and expensive-looking, the kind of envelope that made her stomach drop before she even opened it. She pulled Lily's hand and kept walking, but she had already seen the words, "Debt Collector." Final notice. She opened it after she had dropped Lily at the shelter. She read it in the bathroom of the Rosewood while waiting for her shift to start. The words seemed to multiply on the page the more she read them. $85,000. Gambling debts. Her ex-boyfriend's name, Marcus Chen, connected to her name through documents that had been forged, documents she had never signed, documents that apparently proved she was responsible for his crimes. $85,000 in 7 days, or they would begin legal proceedings. They would freeze her assets. They would wage garnish her income. They would destroy what little life she had built. 77 cents. That was what was left in her checking account after the notice arrived. She sat in the bathroom stall and did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 8 years ago when she ran from Marcus's apartment with nothing but a backpack and the clothes she was wearing. She had used up all her tears learning to survive. She had no tears left. What she had was 7 days. She had $17. She had a job at McGinty's that paid minimum wage and tips that never exceeded $20 a shift. She had the shelter and Lily and the thought that if they took everything, at least they could not take that, at least they could not take a child's hand in hers. But what she did not know was that on the same night she received that letter, in an office 43 floors above the city, a man named Matteo Romano was reviewing photographs of a child, a 6-year-old girl named Lily who had been missing from his life for 2 months, a girl whose mother had stolen her away and then died in a car accident, a girl who the system had swallowed and lost. And in that moment, Matteo Romano, who had killed 17 men and ordered the death of 32 more, who had built an empire on violence and betrayal, was making a decision that would change everything. 7 days. Valentina Reynolds had 7 days to find $85,000 or watch everything collapse. The debt collector's letter sat on the kitchen counter of her cramped apartment, stamped in red ink like a death sentence, like a blade cutting through everything she had built. Final notice. Those 2 words felt heavier than all the double shifts combined, heavier than the grease stains that would not wash from her skin, heavier than the shame of knowing that a man she had escaped years ago was still finding ways to destroy her. 77 cents remained in her checking account. 1 transaction away from zero. She counted the cash in her wallet 3 times, hoping the numbers would change. $17. A $20 tip from last night's shift that she had folded carefully in her pocket, and change from the dollar store where she had bought rice and canned beans. $17 to cover 4 days until payday. She sat on the edge of her bed and did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 8 years ago when she ran from Marcus Chen's apartment with nothing but a backpack and the clothes on her back, bruises blooming like flowers across her ribs, fear carving itself into her bones. She had used up all her crying learning to survive. What she did not know was that 3 miles away, in a restaurant called Luciano's where the waiters wore white gloves and the wine cost more than her monthly rent, Preston Mercer was ordering a second martini and reviewing his phone. Preston was 28 years old, styled like old money, wrapped in tailored fabric that cost $3,000, his Rolex catching the light as he swiped through photographs. Dark hair slicked back, sharp jawline, eyes that had learned to expect the world to move when he spoke. Nephew of Matteo Romano. Not yet in a circle, not yet trusted, not yet powerful enough. But finding his uncle's missing daughter would change that. Finding Lily would prove his worth. He had been hunting leads for weeks. The shelter on Dorchester Avenue. A volunteer named Valentina who worked night shifts at McGinty's diner. A woman nobody would miss if she disappeared. A woman with exactly the kind of poverty that made people desperate enough to betray. Preston arrived at Sacred Heart Shelter on a Tuesday morning with a photograph and a $50 bill folded between his fingers. The volunteer at the desk was young, maybe 19, nervous around expensive men. "I'm looking for information about a girl named Lily. 6 years old. Someone here has been caring for her." He slid the photograph across the desk. Lily's face, printed from a missing person file, smiled up at the volunteer. The young woman's eyes widened. "Recognition. I can't give you information about." Preston slid another $50 forward. "The woman's name. The one who brought her in. That's all I need." The money disappeared into the volunteer's pocket like water into sand. That night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, Preston Mercer stood in the parking lot behind McGinty's diner, leaning against a black Mercedes, waiting. Valentina emerged from the kitchen door carrying a trash bag, her orthopedic shoes worn through at the heels, her apron stained with grease that no amount of washing removes. She froze when she saw him. The bag dropped from her hands. "Valentina Reynolds." Preston's voice was smooth, practiced, like a blade wrapped in silk. "My name is Preston Mercer. And I know about Lily." Blood drained from her face. Her hands trembled. "How do you? I know that you've been sheltering my uncle's daughter. I know that your ex-boyfriend Marcus Chen has creditors looking for you. I know you owe $85,000 in 7 days." He stepped closer, and the parking lot suddenly felt very small, very dark, very isolated. "I know that without help, you will lose everything." Valentina's voice came out fractured, like breaking glass. "What do you want?" "Information. My uncle makes decisions that affect the family business. I need to know what those decisions are. Who visits? What they discuss. Who he trusts. You're going to stay close to Lily, and you're going to tell me everything that happens in his house." Preston pulled out his phone, scrolled, and showed her a photograph. A man with scarred knuckles, a cigarette burning between his teeth. "This is Dimitri. He works for people very interested in my uncle's operation. Dimitri is also very interested in you. He knows about Marcus. He knows about the debt. The people Marcus borrowed from, they have long memories, Valentina. Dimitri could find you anywhere. But if you work with me, if you keep me informed, I make sure Dimitri stays focused elsewhere." Valentina's legs felt like they might give way. "You're asking me to spy on your uncle. To betray. I'm asking you to survive." Preston stepped back, gave her space, made himself look reasonable, almost kind. "My uncle is being played by people who don't care about family. Someone needs to protect him. Someone needs to give him information he can trust. You can be that person. And in return, your debt disappears. All of it. Gone. You and Lily can have a life." She thought of Lily sleeping on a cot in the shelter, her small hands clutching a stuffed rabbit. She thought of the debt collector's letter. She thought of the choice between betrayal and destruction. "I'll do it," she whispered. Preston smiled, and something cold moved behind his eyes. "I knew you would." That night, Valentina sat at her kitchen table with a pen and a piece of paper, her hand shaking so badly she could barely write. She wrote down everything. Preston's threats. The debt. The photograph of Dimitri. The demand that she become a spy. The promise that her silence meant Lily's safety, and her refusal meant her daughter's life would be torn apart. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into Lily's backpack before the reunion at Matteo Romano's mansion. A prayer in paper form. A secret message asking for salvation from someone, anyone, who might listen. The mansion sat at the edge of Boston like a monument to power. Stone walls. Black gates. Security cameras turning slowly in every corner, their red lights blinking like patient predators. The evening was humid, the air thick enough to taste, and distant thunder rolled across the skyline like drums announcing something inevitable. Valentina sat in the back of a car driven by one of Matteo's security team, her hands folded in her lap, her heart moving like a trapped bird. The foyer took her breath away. Marble floors so polished they reflected the massive crystal chandelier hanging above like a frozen explosion of light. Guards stood in tailored suits, earpieces hidden, eyes that had learned to watch everything. This was a fortress disguised as a home. This was where power lived. Matteo Romano stood in the center of the room, and the world seemed to rotate around him. 42 years old. Broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit so perfectly fitted it looked like armor. Silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. A scar that ran from beneath his eye to his jawline, thin and white, a permanent record of a wound that had not broken him. When he saw Lily, something shifted in his entire body. He moved toward his daughter like a man coming back to life. Lily. Her name was a prayer. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. He picked her up and held her against his chest, and Valentina watched the most dangerous man in Boston become just a father holding his child. Tony and Nino stood nearby, his most trusted lieutenants, and both of them exchanged a look. In 15 years, Tony whispered, barely audible, I have never seen him like this. Matteo turned to Valentina, his eyes intense and terrible. You brought her home. You protected my daughter when my entire organization failed to find her. There is no debt I could repay that would equal what you have given me. Valentina wanted to disappear. I only did what anyone would have done. No. His eyes held hers. You did what someone brave would do. Someone with nothing protected someone helpless. That is not common. That is extraordinary. The dinner happened in a room with a table that stretched like a river of mahogany, a table where deals were made and fates were decided. Candles burned in silver holders. The smell of expensive food, rosemary, garlic, truffle oil, filled the air like a foreign language. Servants moved silently, and Valentina was acutely aware of her worn shoes, her stained waitress uniform, the way her elbows felt too sharp at this table of soft wealth. She was a bird trapped in a cage made of crystal and starlight. Matteo sat across from her. Lily sat between them, her small face luminous with joy at being near her father. Tell me about your life, Matteo said, not with pity but with genuine curiosity. Valentina chose her words carefully. I work at McGinty's. Double shifts. I volunteer at Sacred Heart Shelter. She did not tell him about the debt, the bruises, the scars, the way she counted pennies like a man counts the days before execution. You have no family. No. A single word, carrying the weight of 1,000 stories. Just Lily. And the work. Matteo studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, like glass. The work sustains you. The child anchors you. But what sustains the work, Valentina? What keeps you moving when the weight becomes impossible? She did not have an answer. Nino poured wine, and the conversation shifted to Lily, to small moments of joy that felt like islands in a sea of darkness. Dessert arrived, chocolate so rich it tasted like possibility. Lily pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack. Miss Valentina gave me this. Is it important? She handed the letter to her father. The room stopped breathing. Matteo unfolded the paper, and Valentina watched his expression transform. Confusion. Then a cold, absolute fury. Not directed at her, she could see that immediately. His rage was pointed elsewhere, like a weapon finding its target. He dismissed everyone except Tony and Nino. Valentina, please stay. When the doors closed, the sound was final, like the lid of a coffin being sealed. Matteo's voice came out deadly calm, which was somehow more terrifying than shouting. My nephew Preston Mercer came to you. In the parking lot at McGinty's. He threatened you. He demanded that you become a spy inside my home. He used a man named Dimitri as leverage. Each sentence was a blade. You wrote this letter to warn me. To protect my daughter from being used as a tool in his ambition. Valentina's voice trembled. I couldn't let him. You had every reason to comply. A debt of $85,000. 7 days to find it. An impossible choice between your survival and your integrity. And you chose to warn me instead. Matteo leaned forward, his scar seeming to deepen in the candlelight. Why? Because Lily deserves better than to be a pawn. And because I know what it is like to be powerless. I will not make a child feel that way. Something broke open in Matteo's eyes. Tony and Nino shifted, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, a change in their boss that they could not quite name. Matteo stood and walked to a safe hidden behind a painting. He returned with documents, bank transfers, official papers. Your debt is paid. $85,000. As of tonight, it does not exist. The creditors have been informed. They will not contact you again. Valentina's hand shook. Why would you help me? I am nobody. His voice was quiet and absolute. You are the woman who saved my daughter and refused to betray her even under threat. You are not nobody. You are extraordinary. The next morning, Sophie Langford arrived at the mansion. 35 years old, designed by wealth, her dress alone worth $4,000, her smile a weapon she had perfected over decades. She had been positioning herself as Matteo's future wife, the woman who would stand beside him, the woman whose bloodline and connections would strengthen the empire. She found Valentina in the foyer, wearing yesterday's waitress uniform, her shoes announcing her poverty to anyone with eyes to see. Sophie's smile became ice. You must be the shelter volunteer. How charitable of Matteo to let you visit. Though I hope you understand the difference between gratitude and belonging. People like us don't marry people like you. We help them. And then we move on. Valentina left without responding, but Matteo was standing in the hallway, and he had heard every word. Preston received the call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. His face went white. His hands began to shake. Matteo knew. Matteo knew everything, and Preston understood with crystal clarity that he had just made the worst decision of his life. The parking lot of McGinty's diner stretched empty and dark, the neon sign flickering its last breath before midnight. Valentina walked toward her car, her waitress uniform still clinging to her skin, sweat and grease and the smell of burnt coffee embedded in the fabric. The August heat had not broken. The air hung thick and suffocating, pressing down like a hand against her chest. Headlights swept across the asphalt. A car she did not recognize cut across the lot and stopped between her and her vehicle. Preston Mercer emerged from the driver's side, his expensive shirt unbuttoned to his ribs, his face twisted into something that was not quite rage and not quite desperation. He was a man made of inherited money and no sense, the nephew of power but not the bearer of it, and tonight he was terrified. Thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming. Preston's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her skin, hard enough that she felt her bones shift beneath the pressure. Up close, she could smell the alcohol on his breath, the cologne he wore to mask his sweat. You think you are protected now? His voice cracked on the last word. You think my uncle cares about a waitress? A shelter volunteer? Someone who counts pennies in a studio apartment. Valentina tried to pull away. His grip tightened. You humiliated me. You made me look weak in front of men who already think I am weak. And for what? A woman no one would miss. A woman no one would even notice disappeared. He shoved her backward. Her back hit the diner's metal dumpster with a hollow clang that echoed through the empty lot. I will make you disappear, Preston said quietly. I will take you somewhere no one goes. I will break you slowly enough that you have time to understand what you did. And when I am finished, I will dump your body where the police will never find it. Then I will tell my uncle that you betrayed him too, that you were working with the Costianos. And he will believe me, because why would his own nephew lie? Valentina's breath came in fragments. Her hands shook so badly she could not keep them still. I will do the same thing to that little girl. She will cry for you while I... Headlights flooded the parking lot. A black SUV pulled in fast, cutting off Preston's words. Then another vehicle. Then a third. Men in dark suits stepped out, their movements synchronized, their faces arranged in the kind of calm that belongs to people who have made violence into a profession. Tony emerged first, his jacket tailored to hide the gun beneath his left shoulder. Nino followed, his scarred face catching the diner's neon glow. 4 additional guards fanned out behind them, their hands resting at their sides in the exact posture of men waiting for permission to hurt someone. Preston released Valentina's arm immediately. He smoothed his shirt and forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. Tony. Nino. I was just. Matteo wants to see you. Tony's voice was flat. Not angry. Worse than anger. Now. I can explain. Now, Nino repeated. Preston was pushed into the back seat of the middle SUV. The vehicles moved as one unit, their taillights disappearing into the humid darkness, the sound of their engines fading until only the distant thunder remained. Valentina stood alone in the parking lot, her arm throbbing where Preston had gripped her, the taste of copper in her mouth where she had bitten the inside of her cheek. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply stood there, trembling like a candle in the wind, and waited for her body to stop shaking enough that she could walk. Her apartment was a studio on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like mold and boiled vegetables. The radiator in the corner clanked and hissed, adding heat to an already suffocating room. She locked the door behind her and sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing the waitress uniform. The rain started then, not as drops but as a sudden deluge, hammering against the single window with the force of something alive and angry. The storm had arrived. Thunder rolled across the city like the voice of something ancient and furious, shaking the glass in its frame. Valentina's hands began to shake so badly that she could not hold a glass of water. She tried to stand, made it 2 steps, and collapsed onto the floor with her back against the wall. Her breathing came in short, gasping pulls. Her heart felt like it was trying to break through her ribs. Preston's words circled her mind like vultures. The image he had painted was so specific, so detailed, that her brain could not reject it as fantasy. She could see herself being dragged somewhere dark. She could hear Lily screaming. She could feel the moment when her body would simply stop resisting because resistance required a kind of hope that she did not possess. 8 years of surviving had left her thin. 8 years of working double shifts and eating food pulled from dumpsters had left her malnourished. 8 years of carrying scars across her back like a map of hell had left her believing, in the deepest parts of herself, that she deserved suffering. Matteo's protection was temporary. Men like him did not save women like her. Men like him used them and discarded them when their usefulness ended. Sophie had been right. There was a difference between gratitude and belonging. Between charity and love. She stood on shaking legs and walked to the bathroom. The medicine cabinet above her sink held the usual things. Aspirin. A bottle of antacid. A tube of toothpaste squeezed until it was nearly empty. And behind those things, a bottle of sleeping pills. Prescription, from 3 years ago, before she had stopped believing that a doctor might help her sleep away the trauma. Valentina's fingers reached for the bottle. She took it down from the shelf. The plastic was cool against her palm. She counted the pills through the amber glass. Enough. Definitely enough. It would be so easy. Just to stop fighting. To stop surviving. To stop waking up every morning and pretending that life was worth the living of it. To stop carrying the weight of 8 years of bruises and fear and shame. To just stop. She opened the bottle. The pills rattled against the plastic like tiny bones. Her phone buzzed. A text from the shelter supervisor. Lily wanted to send you something. Check your email. She drew it herself. Valentina set the pill bottle on the bathroom sink and opened her email on her phone with hands that were still shaking. The image loaded slowly. A photo of a child's drawing on white paper. 2 stick figures, one much taller than the other, holding hands. Both had red scribbles on their heads meant to be hair. Between them, the words printed in careful block letters by an adult's hand, Lily and Miss Valentina. Below the figures, the child had drawn lines in different colors. Red, blue, yellow, green, purple. And below the colored lines, she had written in that same careful hand, colors for sad days. When she feels sad, look at this. Valentina sat down on the bathroom floor and cried the kind of tears that come from a place so deep that they empty you completely. She cried until her body could not produce any more water, until her chest ached from the effort of breathing, until something inside her that had been broken for 8 years suddenly found a reason to remain unbroken. She set the pill bottle back in the cabinet, closed the door, and did not open it again. At Matteo Romano's mansion, in an office on the second floor with windows overlooking the storm-tossed Boston skyline, Preston Mercer stood in front of his uncle with his hands in fists and his confidence finally, completely shattered. The office was all dark wood and leather, the walls lined with books that had never been opened, paintings that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Rain streaked the windows. Lightning lit Matteo's face, revealing the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder of a debt paid in blood. Tony stood to the left of the doorway. Nino to the right. For additional guards remained outside, stationed in positions where they could respond to any movement within 2 seconds. Matteo sat behind his desk, his hands folded on the surface, his eyes the color of winter storm clouds. He did not look angry. He looked something far worse, like a man who was watching the dissolution of an assumption he had made about the nature of blood. "You extorted her," Matteo said quietly. "You threatened violence against a woman who had done nothing but shelter my daughter. You plan to use Lily as leverage for your own ambition. You are my blood, Preston. You are my brother's only son. But you are not my family." Preston opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "I didn't, I was just, she owed money. I was trying to help her. I was protecting the family business." Matteo's eyes did not change. "There are men who kill for less than what you have done. Men who would take your life without hesitation or mercy. I am choosing not to be that man. That is your only blessing tonight." He picked up the telephone on his desk and dialed a number that had not been used in 7 years. The phone rang once before someone answered. Matteo said a single sentence, "I am collecting an old debt." He hung up. Preston's face went white. "Uncle, please. I am sorry. I will apologize to her. I will disappear. I will go to California, to Florida, anywhere you want. Please." 30 minutes, Matteo said to Tony. Tony nodded and moved toward Preston. The nephew tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Nino blocked the doorway. Preston threw a punch. Nino caught his wrist and twisted it gently, with the kind of controlled precision that a man uses when he has been taught to hurt people as part of his job description. Preston screamed. He screamed again when they forced him back into the SUV, screamed all the way down the driveway as gravel kicked up beneath the tires. He screamed so loud that Matteo could hear him even from the second floor, his nephew's voice cracking with desperation and terror. The sound cut off when the gate closed. 30 minutes later, as Matteo had predicted, 3 black vehicles pulled into the mansion's drive. Men emerged, their faces arranged in the kind of expression that belongs to people who have been waiting a long time to collect a debt. The leader was named Carlo Castellano, and he wore his wealth the way Matteo wore his power, as something so intrinsic to his being that it required no explanation. Preston was transferred from Matteo's vehicle to Castellano's with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for official state business. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. Preston understood, in the way that terror clarifies understanding, that he was no longer Matteo Romano's responsibility. He was the property of a family that did not forgive. A family that had long memories. The vehicles drove away into the rain-soaked night. By the time Matteo returned to his desk, Preston Mercer had effectively ceased to exist. He would not die, not quickly. But he would disappear into the kind of debt that lasted lifetimes, servitude to men who measured time differently than ordinary people did. Justice, in the world that Matteo inhabited, was not death. Death was too quick, too easy, too merciful. Justice was systematic, permanent. A recalibration of the universe until the imbalance had been corrected through methods that extended far beyond the simple ending of a life. The next evening, the mansion glowed with light. A charity gala had been planned weeks in advance, every important family in Boston invited. 200 people moved through the rooms in designer gowns and expensive suits, holding champagne glasses and discussing things that mattered only to people who had never counted pennies. Sophie Langford was there in a dress that had cost $4,000, her hair styled by someone whose services required appointments 3 months in advance. She moved through the crowd like a woman who believed she owned the space simply by occupying it. She had positioned herself near Matteo, angling her body to suggest intimacy, smiling in the way that had been designed to make men believe they needed her. Matteo stood in the center of the largest room and raised his hand for silence. The crowd quieted. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward him. "I am removing Sophie Langford from my guest list and from the boards of every charity associated with this family," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. "She has demonstrated a pattern of cruelty toward people she considers beneath her. Specifically, she told a woman under my protection that some people are not worthy of belonging. That people like her should be helped, then discarded." Sophie's face went white. People around her began moving subtly away, creating space, the way that people create space around something that has become contagious. "You mistake wealth for worth," Matteo continued. "Leave my home." Sophie tried to speak. Her mouth opened and closed without producing sound. She looked around the room, searching for allies, finding only the careful expressions of people who had just understood that associating with her had become dangerous. She fled. Her mascara ran. Her designer gown caught under her heel as she moved toward the door, and she nearly fell, catching herself against a table, her phone already buzzing with incoming calls that she would not answer because the callers were already revoking their invitations. By morning, her board positions would be revoked. By noon, her charity partnerships would be terminated. By the end of the week, the invitations she had spent 5 years accumulating would vanish as if they had never existed. Her reputation, so carefully constructed over decades, would dissolve like salt in water. The storm had passed. The sky had cleared. And Valentina Reynolds, who had once counted $17 as a miracle, was no longer invisible. For months had passed since the night Matteo Romano watched a woman with nothing stand taller than any lieutenant he commanded. For months since Sophie Langford fled his home in tears and Valentina Reynolds stopped being invisible. The August humidity had broken into autumn, the Boston air turning sharp and clean, carrying the smell of rain that had washed the city clean. Valentina stood at the counter of McGinty's diner, but something had changed. Her orthopedic shoes no longer worn through at the heels. Her apron replaced with a name tag that read Activities Coordinator at Sacred Heart Shelter. She had accepted Matteo's offer to pay the $85,000 debt that had crushed her, but nothing more. The rest, the small clean one-bedroom apartment with windows that faced east, the therapy sessions every Wednesday evening where she learned to name what had happened to her, the confidence that had begun to rebuild itself like a building under construction, she had earned through her own labor. Tony stopped by the diner one Tuesday morning, ordering coffee he did not drink. He watched Valentina move through the space with new authority, helping a younger waitress understand how to calculate tips fairly. He said nothing, but when he returned to the mansion that afternoon, he told Nino what he had observed. "She refuses to let him control her trajectory," Tony said, sitting in the kitchen while Nino prepared Matteo's lunch. "She works. She builds. She makes her own way." Nino smiled, understanding exactly what Tony meant. In 15 years, they had never seen Matteo respect anyone the way he respected her. Not as a subject respects a king, but as one survivor respects another. The diner's landlord had mysteriously reduced her rent by $300 a month. Valentina did not know that Matteo had purchased the building. Her abusive ex-boyfriend, the man whose hands had left those scars mapped across her back like geography, had been arrested on outstanding warrants in a state 300 miles away. Valentina did not know that Matteo had ensured the warrants were flagged, tracked, and executed with precision. Small gestures. Invisible protection. The kind of love that does not announce itself. Every Sunday afternoon, Valentina visited the mansion. Lily ran through the marble halls, no longer the traumatized child who clung to shadows, but a 6-year-old who laughed with genuine delight, her voice echoing off surfaces that had never known such sound. She had learned to trust that Valentina would return. Matteo watched from doorways and across rooms as Valentina braided Lily's hair, as she read stories about magic kingdoms and brave heroines, as she made the child feel safe in ways that even his money could never purchase. "Miss Valentina," Lily would say, reaching up to hold her hand, and something in Matteo's chest would crack open like stone breaking under pressure. One night, during a visit when Lily had fallen asleep in the upstairs guest room, Valentina found Matteo in his study. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto the Boston skyline. The desk held papers and ledgers, the machinery of his empire, but it was the man behind the desk that arrested her attention. He sat in shadow, one hand holding a photograph. When he heard her footsteps, he did not hide it. He set the photograph down and gestured her inside. "My brother," Matteo said, his voice like thunder in the quiet room. "He sold us. 5 years ago, when I was expanding into the Northeast Territory, my own brother contacted the Castellano family and offered them our supply routes, our operation schedules, everything. For money. $3 million to betray blood." Valentina sat across from him, the space between them holding the weight of confession. "I had to choose," Matteo continued. "Show mercy to my brother and watch my family burn, or choose survival. I chose survival. He is alive, somewhere in witness protection, but he is dead to us. Dead to me. Sometimes I wonder what happened to him, if he regrets the choice. But I stopped asking that question years ago because mercy became a luxury I could not afford." Valentina was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady but fractured at the edges. "I stayed for 8 years, she said. After the first time he hit me, I told myself it was my fault. That I deserved it. That if I just became better, quieter, smaller, he would stop. But every apology led to another fist. Every promise to change led to another scar. The night I finally left, I had nothing but the clothes I wore and $17 in my pocket. I left because I realized that staying was not mercy toward him. It was suicide toward myself." Matteo leaned forward. "You survived by choosing yourself. And you survived by choosing your family," Valentina said. "We both made terrible choices because terrible people forced us to." The rain began to fall outside the study windows, a soft percussion against the glass. Neither of them spoke, but the silence held understanding. Two people who had chosen survival over mercy, standing in a room that suddenly felt less like an empire and more like a shelter. The courtyard of the mansion became a place of small miracles. One Saturday afternoon, Matteo taught Lily to ride a bicycle, his large hand steadying the seat while the little girl pedaled with fierce concentration. Valentina watched from a wrought iron bench, smiling in a way that felt dangerous and new. When Lily wobbled and nearly fell, Matteo caught her, and she laughed with delight instead of fear. "Again," Lily demanded. "Again, again, again." And Matteo obliged, because he was learning that the greatest power did not come from empires built on violence but from the small trust of a child who believed he would not let her fall. Valentina brought homemade cookies to the mansion one evening, baked in her tiny kitchen, humble and imperfect compared to what the mansion's chef could create. Matteo bit into one, then another, then a third. "These taste like something real," he said, and meant it. His men exchanged glances. In 15 years, they had watched him consume luxury without pleasure, power without satisfaction. But watching him eat cookies baked by a woman in a small apartment, and seeing genuine contentment cross his face, that changed something about how they understood him. At the 6-month mark, Matteo asked Valentina to dinner. Not at the mansion, not surrounded by his world, but at a small restaurant in the North End where the lighting was soft and the tables were close enough that conversation required intimacy. They sat across from each other, and Matteo did something he had never done. He asked permission. "I would like to tell you something," he said. "May I?" Valentina nodded. "You walked into my world with nothing," he began, "and showed me what real courage looks like. I have spent months trying to understand why a woman I barely knew changed everything for me. Why I cannot stop thinking about you. I think I know now. You did not come to me asking for salvation. You came to me asking for justice. You stood between a child and violence, and you did not ask me to save you. You saved yourself. I have spent my entire life as the most powerful person in every room. But when I am near you, I am not the most powerful person anymore. And I find that I prefer it." Valentina's hands trembled on the table. She had spent for months rebuilding herself, going to therapy, learning to reclaim her voice, working at the shelter with children who reminded her daily why survival mattered. She was no longer the terrified waitress who had slipped that note into Lily's backpack. She was someone new. Someone with choices. "I am not the same person who wrote that note," Valentina said, her voice steady and clear. "I will not be with someone because I owe them, or because I need protection, or because the world is too dangerous to face alone. If this is real, it has to be between equals. Not power and subject. Not rescuer and rescued. Two people who have survived hell and found each other worth protecting." Matteo leaned forward, his expression transformed by something that looked like relief. "Then we start as equals. No debt. No obligation. Just two people choosing to stand beside each other because we want to, not because we have to." 8 months after the night Valentina slipped that secret note into Lily's backpack, she stood at a podium in a shelter fundraiser wearing a simple but elegant dress, no longer the stained diner uniform but someone who commanded a room with quiet authority. She spoke about the children in Sacred Heart Shelter, about vulnerability and protection, about the invisible people who carried invisible wounds. Matteo sat in the audience watching her command the space with precision and compassion, this woman who once counted $17 and thought herself worthless now raising $200,000 in a single night. Lily sat beside him, whispering with pride, "That is Miss Valentina." After the event, they walked through the humid August night, the air thick but comfortable now, distant thunder a memory instead of a threat. They returned to McGinty's diner, which had been renovated into a community kitchen, funded by an anonymous donor they both knew. Valentina touched the counter where she had once counted tips, remembering the woman she had been. The transformation was visible in every detail. Where there had been despair, now there was purpose. At the mansion, standing in the marble foyer where Matteo had once knelt helpless and Valentina had once acted while everyone froze, he held her hand. The empire was secure. The enemies were destroyed. But his greatest treasure was the woman beside him, the one who taught him that power means nothing without humanity. Valentina's scars still existed, still marked her skin, but they no longer defined her. She looked at the man who had seen her worth when she was invisible and chose to stand beside her as an equal. Matteo spoke the words that would echo through everything that came next. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe because tomorrow we are bringing you another story that will remind you why courage comes in unexpected forms. Share this with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Drop a comment telling us what Valentina's bravery meant to you. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.